It's not very often that you get the opportunity to interview a billionaire. However, recently, Hugh Hilton, mergers and acquisitions superstar, gave me exactly that. 15 minutes to ask him some key questions around how he came to be who he is, what are some of his key beliefs, and what fundamentally does he hold on to and implement at every opportunity. You'll learn in this podcast what his father taught him, some of the immense satisfaction he's gotten out of holding integrity, and also his 6 C's. Hugh has also co-authored a book called Business is War with JT Fox. So if you'd like to know more about him, feel free to grab a copy of that through Amazon. And I hope you enjoy this very, very mini version of Think Uncommon.
Hey, Joe.
Hi, Hugh. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I am well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time today.
My
Really
pleasure. Thank
appreciate
you.
you taking time out of your busy day to speak to me.
Well, thank you so much for supporting the book as well.
It was an excellent book, definitely a brilliant read, and it gives us a great indication of exactly what it takes to be in business. I definitely learned a lot, and it's
Wonderful.
on the bedside table for a good period of time.
Great. Good. What would you like to talk about today, Joe?
Talking about the book, Hugh, I have read your contribution, obviously, and everybody's story begins somewhere. It
Hmm.
seems that in your case, as early as college, you had grit.
Yeah,
And even after being denied entry to grad school, you
right.
didn't let that stop you. In fact,
No,
you went back and you studied again to increase your score and ultimately had the satisfaction of having the dean that denied you entry having to approve you entry the second time round.
exactly.
Now that's a pretty big experience for somebody so young. And I imagine
Yep.
that set the stead for you moving forward. So how did that experience as a young adult shape your views on failure?
It was fascinating. It really made me feel to not be afraid of failure, but rather to just outwork or overcome it and not just take it um, and think I'm a failure. And I was fascinated because what happened after that was when I went to law school was interesting. I actually had a job to work for the largest regional shopping center developer in the country, and everybody was interviewing for job offers. So I thought, I'm just going to sign up for an interview with a law firm just to get a job offer to say, oh, yeah, I got one too. So I go to the interview, I sit down, and we're talking. We finish up the interview, and the guy goes, "Well, I'd like to talk about offering you a job." And I said, "Great. Well, let's talk salary." He goes, "There's nothing to talk about. Everybody starts at the same salary." I said, "Now wait a minute." I said, "I'm not some poli sci major who didn't know what to do with my life, so decided to go to law school." I said, "I've got a BBA in finance, an MBA in real estate finance, and a law degree in real property law. I could run your real property practice." He goes, "Yeah, well, that's why I want to hire you." I said, "Yeah, but you got to pay for that." He goes, "No, I
Mm-hmm.
told you everybody starts at the same salary." So I looked at the guy, I said, I'm done with this interview. He kind of looks at me with this startled look on his face. I said, "I believe in meritocracy." I said, "This is no way to run a company." I said, "Have a nice day. See you later." So I get up and I walk out and I go down to the admissions office, and they had everybody's starting salary posted on a board with the name of the firm and their student ID number for confidentiality purposes. So I looked at the highest starting salary, and I was so upset with the interview I just had. I said, "I'm going to show that guy. I'm going to double the highest starting salary out of this law school. How dare he say that, I'm worth the same as anybody else just getting a job." So I went back to my little study booth, and I had the Wall Street Journal, and they had a job offer for a firm called Jones Lang Wood, which is now Jones Lang LaSalle, which was an international real estate advisory firm. And I thought to myself, I'm pretty naive. I said, "Well, they seem international." I said, "Maybe they'd pay me that much money." So I sent my resume over and I get invited out for an interview. So I go to Los Angeles. I've never been to California in my life. I sit down for go through the interview, and then at the end of the interview, the guy goes, "I want to offer you a job." I go, "Good, let's talk salary." He goes, "Okay, I'll pay you X." I looked at him. I said, that's not going to get it done. He goes, what did you say? I said, that salary isn't going to get it done. He goes, really? Well, what exactly is going to get it done? So I took the number, multiplied it by two, and I said it to him. He looks at me, he goes, are you crazy? And without blinking, I looked at him. I said, do I look like I'm crazy? He goes, I can't pay you that kind of money. I said, you know what? That sounds like a personal problem to me. I said, if you can't afford me, that's your problem, not my problem. He's looking at me, goes, just a minute. So he gets up, walks into his office, makes a phone call, comes back out in like 3 or 4 minutes. He sits down, he goes, fine, I'll pay you that. Now I'm thinking like the dog who caught the car. I didn't really anticipate that I was going to be able to get double the highest starting salary out of law school. So then I had to act really kind of casual and nonchalant about it. And so he goes, okay, now let's talk about when you're going to start. And this was the classic. I looked at him, I said, yeah, I'm thinking sometime after Labor Day, I'm thinking about taking the summer off. He goes, if I'm paying you that kind of money, you're starting a day after the bar exam. I said, okay. So that was one of my better ones in terms of just, pushing the limits. And then what was fascinating is I had worked for this firm for 9 months, and they were a British firm, so I had bought a British appraisal practice, and they were losing money in the appraisal practice, and we were making money on the investment side. So out comes the head of this global firm with his two lieutenants. So they come in, and I figure they're going to fire the British appraiser guy because he's losing money. Instead, they fire my boss, and then they call me in to discuss, what happened. So the British head of this firm goes, Hugh, we're running a global firm. We can't have an office losing money. So by God, we had to make a statement. So we fired your boss. And, most little junior people would have thought like, okay, thank you for telling me, Mr. Very big, important. I looked at him and I said, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. No, he goes like this and looks at the number two guy in the firm as if to say, did you hear what that columnist just said to me? And he looks back at me again. I go, that's right, ashamed of yourself. And he has this unbelievable look on his face again. So he's stunned. He doesn't know what to say. So I'm looking around the room. Nobody knows what to say. So I look back at the guy and I said, I spent a fair amount of money on my education. I have a pretty good idea how to run a company. This is no way to run a company. This is nothing more than a cheap scapegoat move. The guy you should have fired sitting right there. I pointed to the British appraiser guy. He goes like this. So everybody is stunned. So I look back at the head of this global firm. I said, I'll tell you what, when you figure out how you want to run your company, you let me know. In the interim, I'm going to go back to my office and go to work. Have a nice day, gentlemen. I turned around and walked out of the office. So 2 minutes later, there's a knock at my door. It's the North American partner. He closes the door. He looks at me, he goes, I've never heard anything like that in my entire professional career. And I go, great. What do you want to do? Fire me? He goes, no, I just hope if I ever get fired, somebody has the balls to stand up for me like you did for your boss. Have a great day. He walks out, he leaves. My boss gets hired to run Bank of America Investment Real Estate, a big one of the top 4 banks in the country. What do you think happens? First thing he does is he hires me because I stood up and did the right thing in terms of supporting him, because it was an inappropriate thing to do, fire him for no reason. So I learned, one of the things I learned is when I was a little kid, my dad used to talk about the corporate ladder. And I thought, oh, there's this ladder, you got to climb up. I said, it must be really hard to get on the bottom rung, because I thought it was like literally a ladder, because I was like 8 or 9. So I thought to myself, I said, I know. And this is where, I used my curiosity and creativity. And part of the 6 C's, I said, I'm going to leverage education to just drop in like a quarter of the way up the ladder, so I won't have to elbow everybody out to try to get on the bottom rung. So, I decided that like when I was 8 or 9. And so that's one of the things I always thought that my father, then when I was like 12 and I was blacktopping the driveway, he comes over and says, hey, there's a couple things you need to know. And I said, what's that? He said, listen, there's only 2 things that society can't take away from you, so you need to protect them with your life. And I said, what's that, Dad? He said, your education and your integrity. I said, okay. And I really felt like with my education, I never had to compromise my integrity or compromise at all, because I always felt like, hey, I'm well enough educated. I could go do anything I wanted to. I could start my own company. And that actually happened. I mean, after I left Bank of America after 4 years to become president of a $2.5 billion real estate investment platform, in the late 80s, we had the savings and loan crisis. And what happened is the savings and loan industry way over leveraged. And so there was a real estate collapse. And what happened is the interest rate went all the way up to 9%. It was like down at 6. And so, and the real estate yields were 6. So I went to the CEO, I was the president, and I said, hey, listen, the T-bills are 9, which means real estate, risk-free real estate yield should be 11. I said, and there's 6. So I said, this is not going to end well. We need to sell all our non-core assets, go to cash, wait for the market to collapse, and then go back in and buy everything on the cheap. And he said, well, why would we do that? We'd lose all asset management fees. And I said, have you ever heard the word fiduciary? And he goes, yes. I said, that's why. He goes, I appreciate the thought, but I think we'll stay the course. And I looked at him, I said, okay, let me know how it works out for you. He goes, what'd you say? I said, let me know how that works out for you. He goes, what does that mean? I said, that means I quit. He goes, you can't quit. You're running the whole thing. I said, no, I just told you a minute ago. I quit when I said, let me know how that works out for you. And I said, I won't be out of here in 30 days. I'll be out here by the end of the day. He goes, why would you do that? I said, because I sleep really well at night, knowing I'm doing what's in the best interest of our client, not what's in our personal financial best interest. So good luck. So I packed up all my stuff and left and started my own company, and then called a good friend of mine that I went to college with named Brian Marcel, who had a burgeoning company of 6 people at that time called Alvarez and Marcel. And I said, Brian, do you have any real estate component to these corporate restructures you do? And he goes, yeah, they all have real estate. I said, okay, I'll start my firm and you can hire me as a stringer and we'll go from there. So he did. And then a year later, he wanted to open up a West Coast office. So he said, hey, I want to buy your company. I said, you can't afford your company. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, I have a real expensive copier lease. I think it's like $1,200 a month. So I'm not sure that you could afford that. He goes, oh, yeah, right. So anyways, I joined as employee number 7. Now the firm's 11,000 employees. So it
Wow.
was just it's been an interesting journey where I've always been true to myself, my core beliefs, and I've just never compromised. And it's just held me in good stead.
There's such a lesson in there, Hugh. My gosh, for so many people that just bend and sway with the latest thing, trying to people please and make sure they stay on
Exactly.
the right side of the people that matter at the time.
Exactly.
That's not just about failure for you. That whole story is based in integrity. I think your dad taught
Yeah.
you very well, even from a young age.
Yeah. I
Better than
learned
it
something
served you
blacktopping
well.
the driveway that day, right?
Random lessons from dad in the driveway. I love
Yeah,
it.
exactly. Exactly.
I'm
So,
glad that you referenced the 6 C's, actually. I did a little bit of chat about that and did a bit of research. And you've spoken about a scenario where you persisted with a deal and noting that your commitment led to that being accepted as what you referred to as the largest lease in Colorado at the time.
right,
Now, at the moment, we're in a world where self-doubt is practically a diagnosis. So
right.
how do you know when to stay committed to a deal and when to walk away?
Well, it's a great question. It depends on, there's a lot of different aspects of deals, when to walk away or this or that and another thing, but I try to anticipate the the outcome, and I try, for example, in real estate, some of the best deals I've done are when I've not been super greedy, and the way I say it is, hey, you need to know when to hold them and when to fold them. And so we had a deal, building. It was fascinating that we bought from a savings credit union. Then we fixed it, and we white boxed it, but we hadn't really done any tenant improvements and stuff. And somebody approached us about buying the building. So we
Mm.
could have done one or two things. We could have said, no, we're going to wait until we have a tenant and sell it when it's leased. But the price they offered us was about a 30% return, and we didn't have to spend the rest of the capital to complete the renovation. And they wanted to buy it and then have enough upside so they could lease it and sell it. So I sold it to them then. And some people go, why didn't you do the whole thing? I said, because you need to know, you have an innate feeling is now the best time to hold, or do I wait until I've completely finished everything and sold it? And I thought the price was fair. I didn't need to, there's an old saying that piglets grow up to be happy and hogs go off to slaughter. So rather than being a hog, I was being piggy. So I got, a nice price. Then what happened is I bought this other building, started the same thing. The same buyer came up to us on that deal and said, hey, will you sell it to us before it's leased? We bought it for 5 million, 6 million, and we sold it for like almost 30 million. So it was like 160% IRR, 6 times on our money. And I said, sure. So he sold it. And then what happened is fascinating is then the market collapsed and they got stuck holding the building. So if I had held that, continued doing it, then I would have got caught holding the building. But instead of being greedy, I was just thoughtful in terms of being profitable and what's an adequate return. That happened to be a just beyond belief return, but I still sold it, and at the time with enough upside so he could make money on it too. So that's an
Brilliant.
example. Yeah,
I love that.
yeah,
Hugh, we're
don't.
out of time. I had so many
Yeah,
questions to ask you, but I'd just like to wrap it up with one.
sure.
The people that are part of this podcast have what we call an uncommon mindset. And looking back on your career, there's definitely been a lot of uncommon choices that you've made. What's
Yes.
one mindset or belief that's never failed you that you'd like to share with everybody?
I to develop your curiosity and creativity, and this is meant for right-handed people, that it's absolutely critical. And the best way to explain it is I'd like to say is, hey, think about if you're in a street fight and you have to tie one hand behind your back and the person you're fighting is using two hands, meaning both sides of the brain, who do you think is going to win? They go like the person with two hands. I said, so you need to understand that if you're right-handed innately, you're not curious and creative. You have to consciously develop that skill set. And once you do, and you're using both sides of your brain, you have a tremendously increased probability of success. And I can look back in the 6 C's. That's why the second and third C is curiosity and creativity. Because, as a matter of fact, when I gave a speech in South Africa to about 5,000 people, at JT, afterwards, the wealthiest person in South Africa gave a speech, and somebody asked him at the end of the speech, what do you attribute your success to? And he said, curiosity. So people that are right-handed really appreciate or undervalue the importance of creativity and curiosity. And even in a non-business environment, hey, we're only here for a short period of time. You should be as
Yeah.
curious as possible and enjoy the journey as much as you can and not get caught in like this little narrow roadway through life, because there's so many fascinating things here to experience and enjoy. So those are the two things.